you stay here under the circumstances."
"You've done it! You can't kid me! You've done it!"
"I don't want to deceive you. I urged the governor to take the only possible step consistent with his obligations."
"Why couldn't you leave me be? I wasn't doing you no harm."
"You may be sure that if you had, I should be the last man to resent it."
"Do you think I want to stay on in this poor imitation of a burg? I don't look no butcher, do I?"
"In that case, I don't see what cause of complaint you have," he answered. She gave an inarticulate cry of rage,
"Ah!"
and flung out of the room. There was a short silence. "It's a relief to know that the governor has acted at last," said Davidson finally. "He's a weak man, and he shilly-shallied. He said she was only here for a fortnight anyway, and if she went on to Apia, that was under British jurisdiction and had nothing to do with him." The missionary sprang to his feet and strode across the room. "It's terrible the way the men who are in authority seek to evade their responsibility. They speak as though evil that was out of sight ceased to be evil. The very existence of that woman is a scandal, and it does not help matters to shift it to another of the islands. In the end I had to speak straight from the shoulder." Davidson's brow lowered, and he protruded his firm chin. He looked fierce and determined. "What do you mean by that?" "Our mission is not entirely without influence at Washington. I pointed out to the governor that it wouldn't do him any good if there was a complaint about the way he managed things here." "What has she got to do?" asked the doctor, after a pause. "The San Francisco boat is due here from Sydney next Tuesday. She's to sail on that." That was in 5 days' time. It was next day, when he was coming back from the hospital, where for want of something better to do MacPhail spent most of his mornings, that the half-caste stopped him as he was going upstairs. "'Scuse me, Dr. MacPhail. Miss Thompson's sick. Will you have a look at her?" "Certainly." Horn led him to her room. She was sitting in a chair idly, neither reading nor sewing, staring in front of her. She wore her white dress and the large hat with the flowers on it. MacPhail noticed that her skin was yellow and muddy under her powder, and her eyes were heavy. "I'm sorry to hear you're not well," he said.
"Oh, I ain't sick, really. I just said that because I just had to see you. I've got to clear on a boat that's going to 'Frisco."
She looked at him, and he saw that her eyes were suddenly startled. She opened and clenched her hands spasmodically. The trader stood at the door, listening. "So I understand," said the doctor. She gave a little gulp.
"I guess it ain't very convenient for me to go to 'Frisco just now. I went to see the governor yesterday afternoon, but I couldn't get to him. I saw the secretary, and he told me I'd got to take that boat, and that was all there was to it. I just had to see the governor, so I waited outside his house this morning, and when he come out I spoke to him. He didn't want to speak to me, I'll say, but I wouldn't let him shake me off. And at last he said he hadn't no objection to my staying here till the next boat to Sydney, if the Reverend Davidson will stand for it." She stopped and looked at Dr. MacPhail anxiously. "I don't know exactly what I can do," he said. "Well, I thought maybe you wouldn't mind asking him. I swear to God, I won't start anything here if he'll just only let me stay. I won't go out of the house, if that'll suit him. It's no more'n a fortnight."
"I'll ask him." "He won't stand for it," said Horn. "He'll have you out on Tuesday, so you may as well make up your mind to it."
"Tell him I can get work in Sydney. Straight stuff, I mean. 'Tain't asking very much."
"I'll do what I can."
"And come and tell me right away, will you?" I can't set down to a thing till I get the dope one way or the other." It was not an errand that much pleased the doctor, and characteristically, perhaps, he went about it indirectly. He told his wife what Miss Thompson had said to him, and asked her to speak to Mrs Davidson. The missionary's attitude seemed rather arbitrary, and it could do no harm if the girl were allowed to stay in Pago Pago another fortnight. But he was not prepared for the result of his diplomacy. The missionary came to him straight away. "Mrs Davidson tells me that Thompson has been speaking to you." Dr Macphail, thus directly tackled, had the shy man's resentment at being forced out into the open. He felt his temper rising, and he flushed. "I don't see that it can make any difference if she goes to Sydney rather than to San Francisco, and so long as she promises to behave while she's here it's dashed hard to persecute her." The missionary fixed him with his stern eyes. "Why is she unwilling to go back to San Francisco?" "I didn't inquire," answered the doctor with some asperity, "and I think one does better to mind one's own business." Perhaps it was not a very tactful answer. "The governor has ordered her to be deported by the first boat that leaves the island. He's only done his duty, and I will not interfere. Her presence is a peril here." Part 2